ADACA is inspiration done right. It's what you get when someone combines their love for Half-Life, Halo, and Stalker into a new game. This is not an imitation or a clone of those games. It's an entirely new experience. This game was crafted out of love and dedication on the Unreal Engine by a singular person, Cirrus Pendre. And I'm quite happy to say, we have another Half-Life. Hey, Jarek here. If you remember this game, it's because I've kind of covered it before. Well, the demo of a beta build. Yeah, a lot has changed since then. And I thought I had only covered this demo like 6 or 7 months ago, until I looked at the date of that video. It was almost 2 years ago in 2020. Yeah, actually, it was in 2020, that about checks out. Man, I have no perception of time over these last few years. Anyway, you heard right. This is a Half-Life. I am so happy that we're starting to see more games so inspired by that era of Half-Life and just early 2000 shooters in general. Let's start with the tech behind this game. Graphically, it goes for a low poly look. Sort of. Textures and whatnot look kind of low poly, however post-processing effects, lighting, all of that is up to date. So it sort of goes for this updated retro look, and that admittingly fits pretty well for an early 2000s shooter. But this game is a prime example of how much art style can carry a game. ADACA looks somewhat retro, but that didn't stop me from staring off into the sunset, or off into the night sky. ADACA is not the next Crisis. But it doesn't need to be to look good. The main thing I noticed that had changed from the demo is that the lighting had improved quite substantially. The next thing I noticed is that there is a lot of new music, and it's incredibly fitting to wherever it plays in the game. Or if it doesn't play, there are moments where maybe all you're hearing is just rain, and this is even better. This is a good example of being inspired by Half-Life. If you go back and play Half-Life, music doesn't actually play too often. You're mostly met by a believable audio soundscape. However, when music does play, there is purpose to it. If you're finding yourself having to add music to your game to make it feel less lifeless, well, it's not going to help that much. The music won't fix that issue. However, when music is added right, it adds to whatever is supposed to be going on at the moment. In this game, a lot of the time that music adds to the sense of wonder. You're on a new planet, you don't know where you are, and you don't know what's going on. Would I say the music is one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard? No, not really. I would just say that it complements the game extremely well. On a similarly important note, how is the actual tech behind the game? Well, thankfully, I didn't have a single problem with this game. Every option I wanted to be here is here, yes, including an FOV slider. The game never crashed on me and it did run smoothly, but I am running out of 3080, so take that as you will. But arguably, most importantly for a game like this, the movement felt good. It didn't feel like there was aim acceleration, everything felt responsive. When I ran, when I jumped, things felt intuitive and natural. Not only that, but they felt like a game from the early 2000s. There is definitely a very specific feel to Half-Life 2's movement, and if I had to compare ADACA to anything, it would be that. Except for the mixture of having a bit of Halo's jump feel. Point being, you can jump right into this game, you can install it, you can change your settings, there's no janky feel to it, there's nothing you have to relearn for the basics. You can just play the game as intended right away. So what do you get when you start playing? Well, the game opens in telling you that you accidentally somehow destroyed 40 million's worth of company property. In the demo, this was 4 million. It has been raised to 40 million. I don't know how this accidentally happens. Either way, your punishment is that you're forced to be a military conscript for 20 years with no chance of parole. At least that was what was supposed to happen, but you were ditched in a cryotube. Soon you are awoken by Dr. Chops, who is totally not Lemmy from Motorhead. He says your arm was totally screwed and he had to replace it, which is not a problem because now your arm is a gravity gun. I talked about this in the demo, but I love this change because one of my biggest complaints about Half-Life 2 is how long it takes to swap weapons, including pulling out the gravity gun. That's a problem because the gravity gun is essential to Half-Life 2. Well, in ADACA, you don't have this problem. With the gravity gun being your left arm, you can quite literally grab anything and launch anything anytime you want, no matter if you're holding a gun or not. You can even manage to grab weapons out of enemies' hands if you stun them. Small quality of life improvements like this to games we love go a long way. Anyway, episode 1 is the demo we already played. This is mostly introducing you with the free scrappers, the side you are going to be fighting for. You can think of this part of the game as root canal, giving you some answers but not enough. You still have questions, while at the same time giving you a lot of action. The police are obviously the main enemies, at least at the beginning of the game. There are other factions like mercenaries and another faction on top of that, a cult. And this cult is very bizarre. It's surrounded by mystery and a lot of the story involves them. Dr. Chops goes out to what this game refers to as the exclusion zone, tells you he has everything under control and not to follow him. So of course you follow him because that's suspicious. Once in this exclusion zone, things are not right. This is the part of the game where you find yourself asking, what's going on? Why is that happening? Where did this enemy come from? What is that enemy? And I won't say anything more after this point, because if I do, it's kind of major spoiler territory, and I think it's better if you see it firsthand on your own. So instead, I'll move on to the gameplay. And as I said, this is a good mixture of Half-Life and Halo and Stalker. Although most of it is Half-Life, that is the main inspiration. In fact, the more I played this, the less Halo I saw. The HUD kind of looks Halo-y and a lot of the art style is definitely inspired by Halo, but the gameplay itself doesn't seem to be very Halo. It's mostly the gunplay, especially when you scope in. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the guns. These guns are a great mixture of believable guns and sci-fi guns. And they've also been tweaked drastically since the demo. One of the big changes is that there is now reloading. Now, I know some of you might be complaining, but the way this game plays is not like a boomer shooter. There was no reloading in the beta, and it felt very off to me. With the way these guns feel, the way you move, the way the guns sound, it very much so seems like a game that should have reloading, and I found myself constantly trying to when I played this game, and that's not a problem I have in boomer shooters. Keep in mind, this is supposed to be an early to mid 2000 shooter, not a 90s shooter. And the balance this brought in is honestly a big improvement. As for the actual animations, well, you don't have hands, but the animations for the guns are surprisingly pretty good. There's even empty and non-empty reloads. The question is there a empty and non-empty reload? All right, so is the normal reload different than that? Let's see. Yeah, there is. Cool. And with so many different factions of enemies, you get a lot of weapon variety. So on one moment you could be using a standard SMG, then you could be using a semi-auto DMR, then you could be using a stake gun, and then you could be using a plasma gun. And almost all of these weapons now have a split function, which I didn't ask for, but I will gladly take. For example, the pump action shotgun can now do a double shot. Probably taken directly out of Half-Life Alyx, but I don't care, it makes it more fun. Or that plasma gun I mentioned. It kind of functions like a plasma LMG, but the split function basically turns into a plasma shotgun. Try the split function. But since the beta, there's been a few changes to one gun in particular I want to talk about that made it so much better. That is this burst needler rifle thing. I had two complaints. The first one is that in the beta, it didn't super combine. Now, Sears said this is because at that point, it literally would just be the Halo needler rifle, but I think that's the expectation, and people were pretty disappointed that it didn't super combine. So now it does! And yeah, this is way more fun. The second change is that before, this bayonet was really overpowered. It could basically kill everything in one swing, and you could go through whole sections of the game without shooting a single round. So this has been nerfed. It no longer is that strong. To compensate for this, now it has some movement to it. Every time you swing your bayonet, you get a lunge. This is a huge improvement because now it's not overpowered, and also I find it more fun. I can definitely see speedrunners abusing this. There's also been a few grenades added since the beta. Of course, you have your typical frag grenades, which you can catch and toss back. Then you have your Molotovs, And then you have basically dynamo grenades. These don't seem incredibly useful at first until you start getting to some of the stronger enemies, and then they are saving your ass. These grenades and the needler rifle are the two instances where they're just kind of taken straight out of another game, but work quite well here. Then of course there's your gravity arm. As I mentioned before, it's very fluid to just grab and toss anything you want. And again, not needing to wait to pull out your gravity gun makes it way more enjoyable to use. Not to say the gravity gun wasn't a lot of fun, obviously it was, because every game afterward needed a gravity gun. Physics and a gravity gun type thing was just kind of the trend afterward. Doom 3 tried to do it, even Time Splitters tried to do it. However, both of those games kind of failed at copying Half-Life 2 because there just wasn't enough props or really any time to use them. This isn't the case with ADACA. These environments are littered with props to pick up. Hell, one of the first combat encounters has a crowbar, a wrench, and a saw blade. I wonder where those came from. But even more important, the physics match what you would expect from a game of that era. I've said this time and time again, but it's so much more fun to have proper ragdolls rather than just animations that every enemy will do when you shoot them in a certain spot. Like, that's just not as rewarding compared to launching them into space. Oh. Oh my god. It's a concussion rifle. And if one of your in-game mechanics literally involves physics, you need a proper physics engine like this for both items in the environment and for ragdolls. And this game delivers, it's fun. So yeah, that's the main campaign. But there's something else, an entirely different mode, and you're probably going to be spending most of your time in this mode after you beat the campaign. At first, the game might even seem a bit short. It's about 3.5 hours long. But man, this other mode adds a lot of time. This is really where you start to see the Stalker inspiration. This mode is basically Stalker. The game is very hands-off. You kind of get dumped into this space, and you find new quests as you explore. You'll also find artifacts that you can go back to your ship and trade in for items you can buy. Oh, also the mode is called Zone Patrol. I think I forgot to mention the name. And it's a pretty accurate name, with a heavy focus on exploration. And there are totally new things that you will not see in the campaign that you'll see in this mode. What this mode does incredibly well is atmosphere. You want to explore because you have no idea what you're running into. It's weird. I have no better way to describe this but to just show you a few clips. I'm gonna leave. That is, not what I want. And now we got stealth. I hear yelling in the distance. Oh. Where did it go? A lot of it's the tone. Like, the theme Silent Hill 2 plays with. You assume it's just going to be... I'm gonna back away from that. I feel like I should be inside. Yeah, it was a good call. What I expected out of this game was a Half-Life. I expected to get a linear campaign inspired by Half-Life and Halo. What I didn't expect was a side mode inspired by Stalker, to the point of where it basically is another Stalker, and I'm totally down with that. I could tell when I was playing it that this mode was that mode that the dev wanted to keep just putting more and more things into. And I asked him that and he said, yeah, this game became my feature creep dump. In most other modes that would be a terrible idea. But with the exploration and sort of open worldness of this mode, it ended up great. This mode is what came out of that open world thing you could explore in the beta that didn't really have any point. Back then, that was Cirrus just kind of working on some sort of open world map because he liked the way Halo Infinite looked in the trailers. And somehow out of that, it turned into Stalker. I don't know how that happened, but again, I'm not complaining. So yeah, that's ADACA. It's fully out on Steam now for 25 bucks. What I should say though is that the campaign isn't entirely fully done. What is there is complete, but episode 3 will come at a later date, but it will be free. As of right now, $25 for the amount of content in this game is a good price. And mostly ADACA just makes me happy. Happy that I'm finally seeing more and more games being inspired by those early to mid to late 2000s games that I loved. Though again, I didn't expect to get a Stalker fix out of this game. So yeah, I would highly recommend. I'll put a link down below in the video information as to where you can find it on Steam. And I know Cirrus is pretty nervous about releasing his first full game onto Steam, which is understandable, but he's also been working on basically only this for the last like 2-3 years, so show him some support. And I think that's it. I think that's just everything I have to say about ADACA. I want to give a big thanks to everyone that joined me over on Twitch. If you want to go follow me on Twitch, you can click on the bottom right. It is twitch.tv/JerrickForGamingDragon. If you subscribe, you get to see my videos at minimum 1 week ahead of time. And of course, I want to give a big thanks to all of you for watching this video.